In 1896, a farmer from New Zealand came up with a strange plan. He decided to take 400 sheep, a rare breed raised for their wool, to a remote island where no humans lived, only wind, rocks, and extreme cold. But in the end, the project failed. The farmer left, abandoning the sheep to their fate. Years passed. The island remained uninhabited. Then, 75 years later, when people returned to the island, they were shocked. Not only had the sheep survived, but their population had grown significantly. These sheep had transformed into something completely different. Their bodies had become larger, their wool thicker, and they had turned completely wild. It was as if they had evolved into another kind of animal. But how did these sheep survive? In today's video, we'll find out. Located in the South Pacific Ocean, Campbell Island was discovered in 1810 by an Australian captain during a seal hunting expedition. Since the ship was owned by the Campbell brothers of Sydney, he named the island after them. Initially, the island was used for hunting sea lions and later became a base for seal hunters. In 1896, the island was included in a pastoral lease system, which allowed people to lease government land for livestock farming. James Gordon of Gisborne signed the first lease agreement and sent around 400 sheep to the island, along with timber to build shelters. By 1900, the original owner faced financial difficulties. Captain Tucker purchased the lease and decided to expand the sheep farm. He sent 3 more shipments, each containing about 1,000 sheep, most of which were Merino or Merino Coast breeds. By 1913, the sheep population had grown between 7,000 and 8,000. The island was actually suitable for sheep farming. It had various food sources, including large plants known as mega-herbs, which absorbed a lot of sunlight and helped the sheep survive in the harsh environment. But over time, the natural resources began to deplete. As a result, the sheep population started to decline. In 1931, the project was abandoned. At that time, the sheep population had dropped to around 4,000. The workers on the island faced extreme hardship. They were stranded for 2 years without any boats or communication. Eventually, the government sent a ship to rescue them. However, the value of the wool they had collected was less than the cost of the journey, so they received no wages. Even after the owners left, the sheep were abandoned on the island. These sheep had been bred specifically for wool production, meaning they needed regular shearing. Without it, excessive wool growth could threaten their survival. A good example is a sheep named Barak in Australia, found in 2021. His wool had grown so much that he could barely see or walk. It was estimated that he had been in that condition for 5 to 7 years. Besides wool, sheep are not good at defending themselves. Even if they survive a predator attack, they can die from injuries or panic. Sheep are very sensitive animals. However, the environmental conditions on Campbell Island helped them survive. The island was surrounded by rocky hills, and strong winds prevented insects like flies from thriving. By 1913, the sheep population had reached its peak, but by 1931, it began to decline due to food shortages. Surprisingly, between 1931 and 1958, the sheep population began to grow again, without any human intervention.
At first, the death rate was very high. Sheep that couldn't adapt to the new environment died quickly without leaving offspring. But those with survival traits lived on and passed their genes to the next generation. Over time, only the strongest sheep remained, and their population started increasing again. As the population decreased initially, vegetation on the island had time to recover, providing more food later. Another key factor was the absence of predators. The sheep had no natural enemies on the island. For 40 years, they lived independently, adapting to the harsh environment without human care, even though they were once completely dependent on humans. In 1975, when humans returned to collect sheep, they discovered something remarkable. Although the sheep looked similar, they had actually evolved into a completely different form. Their physical features had changed, their legs were longer, and they held their heads higher than mainland sheep. Due to the harsh weather, their wool had become rough, and their jaws had deformed from eating tough vegetation. When scientists tried to feed them regular food, the sheep didn't understand how to eat it. They tried to tear the hay apart, scattering it everywhere. Eventually, scientists had to tie the hay into bundles so the sheep could eat in the way they were used to. Their behavior had also changed. For example, they gave birth while standing, and their newborns could walk almost immediately. They had developed resistance to 2 diseases and even showed a tendency to shed wool naturally, like their wild ancestors. In terms of daily activity, the sheep grazed for long hours, from 4 a.m. to 11 p.m., despite harsh weather. They would turn their backs to the wind while feeding, a survival strategy that helped them cope with the environment. Over time, the government decided to protect the island's ecosystem. In 1937, it was designated for conservation, and in 1954, it became a nature reserve. An order was issued to remove the sheep. By 1958, scientific studies estimated the sheep population had dropped below 1,000, although it began increasing again. To solve the problem, fences were built across the island, and teams were hired to cull the sheep. Around 3,000 sheep were eliminated in multiple operations. By the late 1980s, the last sheep on the island had been killed. Although some people were saddened, it was necessary to protect the island's natural ecosystem.
However, not all sheep were killed. During rescue missions in 1975 and 1976, some sheep were captured and taken to New Zealand for breeding purposes. Capturing them was difficult because they had become completely wild. Eventually, scientists used special whistles to gather them and successfully collected 58 sheep. These sheep were transported off the island. In New Zealand, they appeared large and similar to regular sheep, and they reproduced well. However, their strong maternal instincts required extra care. From the 58 sheep, the Ministry of Agriculture carefully selected 10 healthy ones. They were secured using dog collars and tied to fences. Scientists then carried them one by one over a distance of about 1.2 miles across a hill to reach the ship. These sheep eventually left the island, and their lineage was preserved as a pure and rare breed. However, in 2017, a strange incident occurred. 5 rare sheep were stolen and slaughtered, reducing the population to around 30. The owner was devastated, especially because these sheep were genetically valuable. Even more tragic, some of the stolen sheep were pregnant and were due to give birth within 2 weeks. The owner believed the theft was for meat. Despite this, the remaining sheep continued to survive and reproduce, preserving their unique lineage. If they had remained on the island instead of being kept in captivity, they might have evolved into an entirely new species, just like other cases seen in evolutionary history.